Now we're going to turn into a little more complex database interactions. We're going to open up the author manager sample. And like before, there's a list box here, which will be filled with the author, so it's still called LST list. But now we have a series of buttons. We still have some information for displaying the author, so when you select an author, it will display the information here. So that it code will be very similar to the author browser. What's going to be added is the code for the update, delete, insert new, and create new buttons that are here. So let's just run this real quick and then look at the code. So when we run this example, again, we're using the pubs database. We're pulling the connection string from webconfig, and we're grabbing the author information, and we're filling that initial list box. So here's our initial list box filled with the different information. If we select an author, their information is populated down here. Now before we were just dumping all the information into a big label. Now we're actually putting the individual fields in individual text boxes. So let's look at the slight changes for that. So if I go into the code, let's scroll way up at the top. So again, on my page load event, I fill the author list box, and this is the exact same code as before, so I won't go over this again. We're creating a reader, a data SQL data reader, reading each item from the database and dropping it into the list box. Okay, so that fills the list box. Now when we select an item from the list box, so when this item changes, we're going to run this list author select index change method will be called automatically. And again, just like before, we're creating a SQL command using the author ID from the list box to select just one record, the record matching that author ID. So we create the SQL command. We create an SQL connection, an SQL command, and an SQL data reader. We open up the connection. We execute the reader using the command. So that runs this SQL against the database. And then we read the record. But now, rather than putting everything into one big label, we're just setting the text. So we have fields out here. We have a field for txt ID, txt name, first name, last name. We have all these text fields, and so for txt first name, we set the text field, and then we grab the reader's, the author's first name, that field from the reader, convert it to a string, and stick it in this text field. Same with the author's last name, phone. So for each of these records, we're grabbing the field from the database, the SQL data reader, so that record, and then we're converting to a string and sticking it into the text field. So that's how we display all the information here. Then we close the reader and close the connection. So that's run whenever we select change an author on the form. So those are very similar to what we have before. Now let's look at some of the new areas, like if we click update or delete. Here, I better stop this running. So if I hit update, we'll take the assumption is that you've selected an author, you've changed one or more of the records or information here, maybe changed the author's phone number or address or something like that. You would update, and we're going to update that data in the database. Similarly, if we select an author and we hit delete, we want to delete that data from the database. Let's start with delete first, because that's a little easier. So command delete, click. So when we click that button, we do this. So we're going to create an SQL command and execute that. So we just create a string to hold our SQL command, and it's just going to be delete from authors, where author ID equals @author ID. Now this is a new way of creating SQL commands that we're going to use here, called parameterized SQL commands. We have to be careful whenever we're grabbing fields from the text, from like a text box, and sticking them right in an SQL command like this. It's very easy if you do that to insert strange commands inside the text box and do strange things. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. But we create this command. And where we want to put a parameter or some text from a field or something, we use this parameter author ID. Okay, we declare our connection and we declare our SQL command. And now, before we execute that command, we say command.parameters add with value. And again, we can specify the parameter we defined up here and then what we want stuck in that value. And in this case, we're going to grab the author ID field from the list box, the selected items value. That will be the author ID. So that will substitute that in here. So it's kind of a two-step process. Now, why do we want to do this? Let's just run this a little bit. Talk about SQL injection. So a really common way for hackers to get into websites, destroy websites, or read data from websites was called SQL injection. It's still a popular term, although all good websites should be doing things to prevent it. So the idea is that if we're hitting delete or update, we're going to be running an SQL command, and part of that command might be one of these fields from here. And someone who knows SQL pretty well can enter text in here that will stop the current SQL command and add in a new SQL command so that you can take control of the database. You could delete all the data in the database or display all the data in the database, little things like that. So we don't want to just blindly copy this text fields into an SQL command. That would be very dangerous. A malicious hacker could take over our database. That's why we have to use this parameterization here whenever we do it. So we're not just taking a text field and putting it into our database, but we're using this parameter operation. And then Microsoft does a lot of checks with this value and make sure it doesn't include special characters that a malicious person would use to change the SQL command. Okay, so now that we have our SQL command and we did our little diversion there into SQL injection attacks, we're just going to try that. We're going to open up our connection. We're going to run our command. Before we were running this as a reader, but now we're going to also do something. Since this command is not returning any data, just deleting a record, we can do an execute non-query. So this is not going to return a reader. It's just going to return a result, which is the number of records deleted. And then we can say deleted records. So we just execute this. And again, if your command is being run, your SQL command is being run and it's not returning any data, you can use this command.execute non-reader, where before we did the let's scroll up to the top. We were doing the command.execute reader, and that would give us a handle to the reader where we could then go through and look at the data in that reader. Okay, let's look at the update command now. Stop this. I'll look at the update command. We were just looking at the delete command, and that's a simple statement to delete the whole record. But update's a little more complicated. So we're going to create our update query. And again, knowing basic SQL, we say update, the name of the table. We say set. And then we say the field and equal to the value, field equal to value. And so we could be saying phone equals at phone. And so what we really want to do is phone equals and then put in the actual phone value here. But we're going to use a parameter. We're going to put at and then give it some name, phone. And then later on down here, we're going to put values into each of those parameters. So now we use that same command we've created, and we go command.parameters add with value, and we say at phone, so it'll find the at phone in our string. And then now we're using the txt phone.text. So we're going to grab this, let's see, this is txt phone, and we're going to grab the text out of that box and stick it in this spot in our query. we could actually look at the entire query if we wanted to see what it was running. So once we've created our command, we can then execute that against our database. So again, we enter a try block, we open the connection, and we execute a non-query, so because we're not getting any result back from this update, just an update value that's returned to us, telling us if that update updated any records or not. So again, we've created our connection with our connection string. We've created our command using our SQL with parameters and our connection, tying that SQL command to that connection. We then updated all the parameters in our SQL command. We opened up our connection and we execute that command, that SQL command, against the database. And then we just display that the records have been updated. So the update field is actually just the number of records that have been updated. And then we close our connection when we're done. Now, if we did update records, we do refresh this list. We call our fill author list, which will refresh the author list also. So again, that's what, when we run this, we can now delete a record from our database, an author from the database, or we can change an author's information. So let's just wait while this starts up. So I can select down here to a record. I can change some information here. So 7722 or 7723, I can then update that. One record has been updated, so this is what update returns. And now I can go back and look, and that information should be updated in the database. So this just updates the database. Now let's look at creating a new record. If we hit create new, that just blanks out all these fields for us. And then if we hit insert, that'll take all these fields and insert that in the database. Let's look at that real quick. So if I click on create new, like I say, it just blanks out. It has nothing to do with the database itself. We're just going through each record in the database, each field in the out here, each text field, and setting it equal to blank, just blanking up all the fields. And now the user can enter some new information here, and then when they click on the insert new, then we're going to take that information at the database. So we do a couple checks. The database requires that there's an ID field, a first name and last name, so make sure those aren't blank. And then once we know that, then we're going to create a new SQL command. So we declare a new string. And some people just always call this string SQL, but here the author likes to use insert SQL or delete SQL, so it keeps better track of what this SQL command is doing. But we're just creating a string, and we go insert into authors, so that's the SQL command, parentheses, and then it is just each field value, each field name, and then that's all in parentheses here. And then values, each of the values that we have. So just a quick review of the SQL. Remember to insert value in the database. We say insert into authors, the table name, and then in parentheses we list all the fields we want to fill. In this case, I'm only going to do author ID, author first name, last name, and phone. And then we say values, and then we specify each of the values that go into each of these respective fields. So when we're creating this parameterized query, we say insert into authors and all the author fields. And then rather than having the actual values here, we're just putting the parameters, the @ and then the name of the parameters here. And then we'll fill in those parameters with the values later on. And in our real query, there are actually a couple more fields here. So again, that's what we're creating here, is this insert into authors, the field names, and then the values, and then we're putting in all the parameters here. And then later on, we're filling in each of those parameters with like the text fields, the author's last name, last name text field, or the txt phone text information taken out into the phone parameter of our query. So again, we've got a connection, we've got a command, we start our try block, we open our connection, we again execute non-query because we're not reading anything in using our command. That'll give us the number of records added, then we display that at the bottom, our little result thing, and then we close our database. If we added records, we also refill the author list so that it will now have the new author information in it. So this is one way of setting up a database so you can change all the database records, all the database information in a database field. Next unit we'll look at binding some more complicated controls which will automate some of these features for us. But sometimes this is actually better because you have better control when you can manually control everything and manually do all the SQL that you want in your database. So this ends the review. We'll do a practice problem where we'll do something a little more simpler than this.